Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Silencing the Press, Terrorism Financing Allegations, and the Case of Frenchie Mae Cumpio. This online event has been organized by the International Association of Women in Radio and Television, or IAWRT International, in collaboration with IAWRT Philippines chapter. I am Violet Gonda, a Zimbabwean journalist based in London and former president of IAWRT. It's an honor to moderate this urgent conversation. Today, we shine a light on the case of Frenchie Mae Cumpio, a courageous community journalist, IAWRT Philippines member, and Yolanda survivor. Frenchie was arrested in 2020 and is also now convicted under terrorism financing charges. Her story is not isolated. It reflects a dangerous pattern, the criminalization of journalism and the shrinking space for independent, critical voices across the global south. We are joined by powerful voices who've stood in solidarity with Frenchie and continue to fight for press freedom. We have Frenchie's lawyer, attorney Julianne Agpalo, Janess and Ellao, who is a journalist and chapter head of IAWRT Philippines, Dabet Castañeda, a journalist and secretary of IAWRT Philippines, and Bei Lee Yi from the Committee to Protect Journalists, or CPJ. We'll also hear solidarity messages from IAWRT members and media freedom groups across Africa, Asia, Europe, Australia, and North America. Thank you all for being here. Now, our speakers will unpack the legal developments, frontline advocacy, and international pressure surrounding Frenchie's case. We'll examine how the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 is being weaponized against journalists in the Philippines and what we as the global community can do to push back. So, we begin with Janess, who will share a personal portrait of Frenchie as both a person and a journalist. Welcome, Janess.
Well, she did not just survive the wind and the waves and the strong storm. She also survived the silence that followed. She saw how the marginalized were left behind in the recovery, and she realized that in the face of disaster, information is a form of relief. That realization turned a survivor into a journalist. For the next 7 years, Frenchie Mae became the voice of Eastern Visayas, reporting on abuses and the struggles of poor farmers through Eastern Vista and her radio program, which was also in partnership uh, with um IAWRT. But in 2020, a different kind of storm hit. Frenchie Mae was arrested in a raid. Today, she is no longer a student. She is the face of a terrifying global trend, which is the weaponization of law to silence the community press. Of course, we all know that 2 months ago, in January 2026, the tragedy of her case reached a new peak after nearly 6 years of pre-trial detention. She was convicted of financing terrorism and, of course, was sentenced to years in prison. The irony is staggering. The court acquitted her of the illegal firearms charges because the evidence was so clearly planted. Yet they convicted her on the technical charge of terror financing. They called her a finance officer, and on the word of so-called rebel returnees. And of course, later, I think her lawyer will be able to share with us some of the updates on the case, especially because last Monday there was a hearing on her case, and of course, and so we are thankful because despite this, the world is not looking away. We saw how the international community was also there to help us, with our campaign to free Frenchie Mae. Among the most recent would be the her nomination to the World Press Freedom Prize by the Committee to Protect Journalists, Reporters Without Borders, and the Free Press United. This is a clarion call to the world that she is a hero. She is a truth teller. We also took note of how at least 90 global media organizations have written to President Marcos Jr. Demanding her release. They recognize that an attack on a community journalist is an attack on the integrity of the profession everywhere. Here at home, groups like Alter Media, the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines, and of course, IAWRT Philippines have highlighted why the nature of this case as state-sponsored intimidation. And also at the same time, we are lucky to have lawyers who continue the grueling work of legal defense and, of course, public awareness. What can the international community do at this point? I think it's important that we all have to ask, no, what else needs to be done because we've done a lot, in the past 6 years, but I think more has to be done. We have to continue moving. We need to be able to sustain legislative lobbying to repeal the Anti-Terrorism Act and the Terror Financing Prevention and Suppression Act because these laws are being used as a technical trap when traditional planted evidence fails to stick. We also see, no, I mean, if not Frenchie Mae, there could be more journalists who can also become victims, no, of these laws, no, or can be weaponized against other journalists as well. We also have to continue advocating for the protection of the community press here in the Philippines. Frenchie Mae did not have the corporate shield of a media giant and community journalists because they report on cases of military abuses that are not I would say that's not a common media agenda. So therefore it has put her in a very vulnerable situation, and I would say that they are closest to the fire. So we must continue to build international support networks that extend past, especially those who are in provinces, in communities, in far flung communities here. So as for now, the verdict against Frenchie May is still there, no? So, but we continue to call it as absurd, as a travesty of justice. We continue to pressure the government, no, to end this judicial harassment. So it's important that we continue to tell her story, to keep her name in the headlines, and to be able to support her in many ways, no, that we all can. No? So maybe later we can expand on that. So for me, it's a reminder that Frenchie May survived the strongest storm in the Philippine history. And so it is our duty to ensure that she survives the legal storm that is intended to silence her. Um, with our sisters here in IWART Philippines and of course our fellow media advocates, we all call for the release of Frenchie Mae Cumpio and defense of press freedom here in the Philippines and in many parts of the world. Thank you, IAWRT, the International Secretariat of IWART, again, no, for organizing this activity.
Thank you very much, Janess. And of course, we should remember that Frenchie Mae, as you said, started off as a Yolanda survivor. So, how do you think her lived experience shaped not only her journalism, but also the way she's been targeted? You are muted, Janess.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. As I've mentioned earlier, it's I think primarily because she is being someone who is reporting on human rights abuses in the Philippines. and also being part of the alternative press or the community journalism here, she is reporting on news that are not that is not usually part of the media agenda of the media conglomerate here. And so at the height of the widespread red tagging at that time, and actually continues to this day, we saw how if you are reporting, then you must be one of them. You know, something like that, di ba? Parang so I think that was the case, no? Because she was really highlighting and reporting military abuses. That was her mission, no? That was her mission in the first place. And I think that her experience as a survivor of the typhoon really shaped, that brand of journalism, that fire in her, because she was a survivor, and she witnessed firsthand and experienced firsthand the difficulties of of not being able to get the due services, the services that are social services due to her. And so I think that really kind of shaped the brand of journalism, the fire in her that we all saw, no, when she herself became a journalist.
Right. And you mentioned red tagging and planted evidence. How are media groups actively countering these narratives without getting drawn into the same propaganda war in the Philippines?
Well, in every statement we've always highlighted, no, and I think this is not just for IWART Philippines, but the rest of the media organizations here in the Philippines. We've always highlighted her work. We've always highlighted the voice that she also brought, no, to the national consciousness, uh because that was really the point, no. It's not just to silence her, but it was also to silence the rest of the community that she was reporting on. I mean 6 years ago, she was reporting on the human rights abuses on these farming communities. When she was arrested, where are who are reporting these now? No, we don't know who are reporting these stories now, and I think that was also the point, no, why they wanted to silence her, because they wanted to also silence the community that she was reporting, no, at that time. And so in every statement we always highlight that it's not also just about her, but also the struggles of the communities, and also how she was, exposing a 20-year-old, no, very young journalist was exposing these abuses. So that's and I think because we are able to reiterate that, no, every time, no, there is an opportunity. I think that so far, no, I think so far, from being an unknown journalist, or a rather unknown journalist, because as I've said, she belongs to the community press. So uh, I think that a lot of journalists also know that these are all just baseless accusations against her, and that definitely this is a trump up charge that is designed to silence not just her, but the communities, no, that she covered, and also help amplify those voices as well.
Right. And just last question for you, Janice. Your point about community journalists lacking a corporate shield really stands out. What practical steps can national and international organizations take to fill that protection gap, in your view?
I think that the situation of the community press is quite unique. Because our workplace is not in the workplace of a community journalist is not in the newsroom. It's not in the typical traditional newsroom. The workplace of a community journalist, by the name of it, diba? It is in the community. So for as long as, of course, the communities that they are covering are under attack, naturally these journalists will also be um, um, under attack as well. So it is quite a challenge because, for instance, in IOWART Philippines, we've done a couple of safety training for journalists. So, but But I think it's very important that because it's the community press that's really most vulnerable and they lack the support. So I think it's very important that we also kind of develop a separate training that will fit the quality that being the unique features of being a community journalist, because as I've said, the workplace of a community journalist is the community itself. And so if the community is under attack, definitely journalists covering those communities will also be under attack. So and I think that is a very unique feature of being a community journalist, and something that we can all like look into as we try to do programs intended for the safety of journalists. And also at the same time, because we're all women for IWART Philippines, it's also very important to be able to identify certain gender-based risks that they are also experiencing as a community journalist, and also the gendered experiences of being red tagged, of being subjected to attacks. And that's something that we've also been doing as part of a global organization of women in media.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Janice. And to our participants and those who have just joined us, please can we all mute our mics, and we will get an opportunity later on in the discussion to get participants to also comment and ask questions. Now, to our second panelist, it's Dabet Castañeda, a journalist and former director of the National Union of Journalists in the Philippines. Now she's now the secretary of IAWRT Philippines, and she recently witnessed Frenchie in court. Dabet, it's over to you.
Hi, good evening. Good evening from the Philippines. And good day to everyone, all our sisters in IWART. Am I audible? I hope I am. And let me share some photos because I'll be sharing a day that I spent with the Frenchie Mae recently. So, uh, do you want to continue? Okay.
We're just
I
getting the
hope.
presentation.
Yep. So, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, let me share some photos. I'm not sure if the videos are embedded, but I think you'll be seeing a lot of photos of how I met Frenchie. I never met her personally before, but I met her a day before her promulgation and 2 days before her 27th birthday. So let me share with you um, also what I experienced inside the court because I was there um, during the promulgation. So I met uh, Filipino journalist Frenchie Mae Cumpio on January 21, 2026. It was one day before her promulgation and 2 days before her 27th birthday. So the detention center was, oops, ah, how do I, okay.
Hello,
Mm,
Dabet.
yes, sorry, I just need to fix the slides. Okay,
Okay.
there you go. Okay, so this is our detention center. If you see, it's Tacloban City Jail, female dormitory. It's in Eastern Philippines, and it's in Eastern Visayas. And when I met her with a journalist from NUJP, she was actually jolly. She was telling a lot of stories about her being able to teach. some of the inmates, no, some of our inmates in the detention center, um, and she was also able to learn how to bake, how to do makeup, how to do manicure and pedicure, a lot of wellness. Because of course, no, she's been 6 years there, so she's also been studying a lot. She's been reading a lot. Because it was her birthday in the next 2 days, I asked her what's her birthday wish, and of course, there can only be one wish. But her wish is to finally go home. And in the evening, after our visit, our jail visit, the family supporters and members of civil society groups held a mass and a candle lighting in a church in Tacloban City also. And then um, the day after, this is the promulgation day. You can see there was very tight security outside the court. So those are policemen in orange, and those were policemen also in blue. So the supporters were cannot enter the court, of course. No, they were outside the gates. But me and some other journalists were able to join the hearings. So there was tight security outside, and the families of Frenchie Mae and her co-accused, lay worker Mariel Domiquel, were also at the promulgation. Okay, so during the promulgation, um, Frenchie and Mariel were emotional all throughout the hearing. They were holding hands. Actually, there were little jumps when the judge said that they were acquitted of illegal possession of firearms, because they have two cases. So everybody in the court were already expecting the two will be coming home that day. But of course, they turned highly emotional. In fact, they were already bursting in tears when the judge said that they were convicted of the second case, financing terrorism. So I was a seat apart from Frenchie's mother and the younger brother. And of course, as an IAWRT sister, I gave emotional support to Frenchie's family at that point. So what you can see is they were already being led, no? Going back to the court. But this is that's Frenchie's mother and her two younger brothers. After the conviction, they were, of course, very emotional outside the court. So after Frenchie Mae and Maria left the court and were brought back to their detention cells, family supporters and journalist organizations held a press conference at the Nearby Cafe. So here's everyone. There were also of course, these are her lawyers, and then there were representatives from the international journalist organizations like Committee to Protect Journalists, Reporters Without Borders, and Free Press Unlimited, who also joined our continuous call to drop the charges against French Mae. Of course, in fact, one of the representative, the director from the Committee to Protect Journalists, and all of the representatives from the international press, they warned that the decision could set a dangerous precedent for journalists and media workers in the Philippines. So, Frenchie is back in court, in the detention, in her detention cell now, and of course, we still call on everyone, of course, to continue to support us, to continue to support Frenchie Mae, and of course Mariel also, for co-accused, for for the dropping of the charges and for their immediate freedom. That would be all. Violet, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dabet, for that moving, I must say, and vital account. You know, the emotional weight of that day and the injustice of the verdict actually resonates deeply with all of us. I just have a couple of questions to ask you. How did being physically present in the courtroom, especially as an IAWRT sister, shape your perspective on the emotional weight of the verdict compared to reporting on it from a distance?
Well, of course, I was I was there also covering the event, for my network. So I had two roles during that day, but of course I couldn't help but really get emotional. But I think at that point, especially because we were also with the families, and what I focused on was really giving emotional supports to to the families, especially to Mariel, to Frenchie's mother, and to younger brothers. So, of course, it gave me a deeper understanding and of how I and it gave me more depth into reporting what had happened in the court. Yeah.
Right. And as you mentioned, Frenchie's birthday wish was simply to go home. How do you see personal milestones like birthdays impacting the psychological toll of prolonged detention on press freedom advocates?
Um, from what I from from what I saw on Frenchie, even when I was with her during the jail visit, she is really a very strong person. She's very bubbly. She's jolly. She does. I know she's in this for. She knows this is a long fight. She knows this is a long struggle. So, I think she's built for having facing a long struggle. Um, I think as a community journalist, she is very she knows that um, living in a community heavily militarized, she knows the consequences. So I believe she is still in high spirits even as we talk, and she still would like to fight this out. So it is very important, I believe, that we outside prison, no, continue to let her feel that she has our support. That is very important because she's getting strength from how strong our support is for her. So it's really very important to continue talking about her case, and in fact to continue to writing and reporting about what she actually did, what she reported before she was incarcerated. It's very important. So I think this is also an invitation for everyone to visit her in jail, and to visit the communities that she used to report she used to report about, because I think that's very important to continue to write, to continue to report about what she was reporting before. I think she would like that, and it would help her as she prepares to be free and to join us again in media.
Thank you very much, Dabet. And now we go to the legal front. Our next speaker is attorney Julianne Agpalo. She is the resident lawyer of the National Union of People's Lawyers, NUPL, and currently the legal counsel of Frenchie Mae Cumpio. Julianne, thank you for joining us.
Hello, hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you once again for inviting me and the NUPL to speak on behalf of Frenchie and Marielle. Let me just share my slides. So, whenever I talk about the case of Frenchie and Marielle, I always like to start to describe particularly the environment, the political environment of the Philippines where Frenchie and Marielle were working on right before their arrest in February 7 of 2020. So that was a time of, it has not changed, so of course, it was a time of rampant red tagging, not only people's organizations, of activists, of human rights defenders, but even as well as red tagging community journalists or journalists in general. And surveillance of progressive organization was also very rampant at that time. And we saw a an abuse of the legal procedures, particularly the use of search warrants as against activists and journalists, in particular in the case of Frenchie Mae, to effectively prosecute them for cases of illegal possession of firearms and explosives. And we are confident to say that in a lot of those cases, in all of those cases that we have handled, it was particularly shown, and when they were eventually dismissed, as the case in Frenchie, that they were in fact planted. So for Frenchie, in particular, prior to her arrest, the Altermedia and even Eastern Vista were able to report that she was under surveillance. Several unidentified men were recorded to be tailing her. And right before her arrest, or right before the implementation of the search warrant, a bouquet of flowers were in fact delivered to her office with her photograph, along with her photograph. And that bouquet is not a normal bouquet, but that is what do you call that? A funeral bouquet. And that was treated as a threat directly to the life of Frenchie. And prior to, again, the implementation of the search warrant, even known organization, people's organization in Tacloban City, where Frenchie and Mariel were arrested, had already requested from the Commission of Human Rights to inspect their offices, because there was this rampant use of search warrants against activists, so that this Commission on Human Rights can actually inspect their offices and see that there are no firearms nor explosives in their offices. Particularly for Frenchie, if we remember that on February 7 of 2020, two search warrants were simultaneously implemented or executed in Tacloban City. One in the boarding house of Frenchie and another in Balay Hampangan. It is a house which several other NGOs, several other people's organizations maintain office. Um, Curiously though, in the search warrant even implemented in this other location, not on the boarding house of Frenchie, that search warrant is directed to 5 persons, including Frenchie and Mariel. So effectively, there were 2 search warrants in the name of Frenchie and Mariel. One as against the boarding house she was renting with Mariel, and also in Balay Hampangan. So on February 7, 2020, on the implementation of those search warrants, of course, the firearms were planted in their rented house. They allegedly found hand grenade just beneath the pillows that they were using. And it was also noted even by the judge in dismissing this case that Frenchie and Mariel were effectively removed from the place that the police officers conducted the search. Hence, there was really an opportunity to plant this evidence. And despite the fact that it was not included in the search warrant, the amount of 500,000 pesos, 557,000 pesos was seized and seized from Frenchie and Mariel. And we go back, of course, to the reason why they had that amount is because, and the reason why Frenchie and Mariel was sharing that boarding house is, apart from being a community journalist for Frenchie and a lay worker for Mariel, they were both the co-conveners of Stand with Samar and Liti. It was a humanitarian effort to address essentially the effects of environmental disasters in the Philippines, the victims of even man-made disasters, for instance, the forced evacuations of communities affected by militarization. So there is heavy documentation on the relief efforts that Frenchie and Mariel headed. So that 557,000 was essentially the fund of the Stand with Samar and Leyte. But despite, again, that not being part of the search warrant, it was effective. It was seized by the police officers. And that seizure of the money was not recorded by the police, not in the inventory, not even the return of the search warrant to the judge who issued that search warrant, because the police officers are actually mandated under the law to say report what they have seized during the implementation of the search warrant to the judge issuing that search warrant. So in this particular case, no documentation whatsoever was done insofar as that 557,000. In effect, under the law, under the eyes of the law, right after the arrest, there was no record of the 557,000. That recording or that documentation only came after, when the lawyers of Frenchie and Mariel filed a motion before the court demanding that that money be returned. So shortly after that motion or that prayer of the lawyers, they issue this certification and request before the other agencies in the Philippines, in particular the Anti-Money Laundering Council, to freeze that particular amount. And from that 557,000, that is where the other cases for civil forfeiture case, the financing cases, the financing terrorism case essentially came from. So by December of that same year, there was already a civil forfeiture case filed against Frenchie and Mariel, apart from the illegal possession of firearms and explosive case, which was subsequently filed right after the implementation of the search warrant. And only a year after they were in detention, was there more than a year after they have already been in detention, was there an information or a complaint filed before the regional trial court at that time in Balogan City for the complaint for financing terrorism. So during the past, say, 5 years that they were incarcerated, the prosecution presented their evidence, and we were able to also present the defense of Frenchie and Mariel to refute the allegation of the prosecution. And by January 13 of 2023, the civil forfeiture was granted. The civil case, the civil aspect of the financing terrorism case was granted by the Manila Trial Court. But that was later on reversed by the Court of Appeals in 2025. In the same manner, by July of 2025, more around about that particular month, while the financing terrorism case was winding down and we were almost finished presenting our evidence, it was at the time that Frenchie actually learned that there was another case that was filed against her, a criminal case for attempted murder and murder, and a different part of Eastern Visayas altogether, a different island, in fact, in Samar. It was in Laoang, alleging now this time, instead of financing terrorists, they are now alleging that Frenchie herself is a terrorist, a member of the New People's Army who was part of an ambush, and who fired upon members of the military and the KAFGU members, essentially. That was the case in Laoang City. However, Fortunately, of course, for Frenchie, her lawyer in Ellao was able to file a motion to quash, effectively asking for the dismissal of the case, and the court granted the dismissal of the case, the murder and attempted murder case of Frenchie and Mariel, and only of Frenchie. And in particular, around in October of 2025, the Court of Appeals likewise made a favorable ruling in favor of Frenchie, which granted the reversal of the civil forfeiture case. So prior actually to the promulgation in January of this year, we were receiving a lot of several good news from the other cases that Frenchie was facing. We had a dismissal of a attempted murder and murder case. That's a very serious charges. We also had a reversal of the civil forfeiture case against her. Effectively, the Court of Appeals said that Frenchie was not involved in any money laundering, in any financing terrorism activities. Hence, the money that was seized from her should be returned in her favor. But however, of course, as to the financing terrorism case, this is, I'm showing you the information, essentially the charge sheet against Frenchie and Mariel. The prosecution alleged, and this is the case that they are convicted with. They are alleging that sometime in March 2019, they saw Frenchie and Mariel in the mountains of Catbalogan City, distributing cash, other logistical supplies to the New People's Army. And that particular act of providing cash, that act of providing logistical supplies, constitutes the crime of financing terrorism under the TFPSA, or the Terror Financing Prevention and Suppression Act of 2012, or the RA 10168. Specifically, it is deemed a violation of Section 8 of that particular law, which is dealing with property or funds of a designated person. So according to the prosecution, which of course affirmed by the court, because of the conviction, not only were Frenchie and Mariel proven to have given these funds in Catbalogan City, it was also proven that the New People's Army is a designated terrorist organization. So this is the disposition part of the conviction against Frenchie and Mariel. They now stand to suffer imprisonment of 12 to 18 years, and they are also fined each to pay 500,000 pesos. So we've already filed our motion for reconsideration from this particular decision sometime in February 6 of this year. We've also received the comment from the prosecution, and because essentially because of this particular conviction, we've also even applied for bail pending appeal for Frenchie and Mariel. Because interestingly though, if we go back from the very start, they were charged with the non-bailable offense of illegal possession of explosive. That was the case, or that was the main reason why Frenchie and Mariel were not out on bail while they were suffering detention while the case was still ongoing. Financing terrorism as a charge is essentially a bailable offense. And precisely because they were only sentenced with a penalty under the criminal laws in the Philippines, if you are not sentenced with a penalty of, say, reclusion perpetua, or what we say life imprisonment, you have the benefit of availing a bail while you are appealing that particular conviction. However, again, bail pending appeal is a discretionary, would already be discretionary upon the court, which would grant that bail. And we've tried doing that with Frenchie and Mariel. Unfortunately, the judge already denied that application for bail for both Frenchie and Mariel. And now we have also filed our motion for reconsideration on our bail application for Frenchie. Essentially, we're arguing, we are praying that that would be granted. We're confident that we were able to show that Frenchie and Mariel are not flight risk, and it would better serve the end of justice if both Frenchie and Mariel are out on bail, so that they can essentially effectively defend themselves and argue before the Court of Appeals, if ever this needs to go to the Court of Appeals, to argue their case and to reverse the particular conviction. So, and at this particular time, last March 23, there was a motion hearing. So the judge just heard the both pending incidents, the motion for reconsideration on the conviction and the motion for reconsideration on the denial for the bail. And we've tried to we moved that the comment of the prosecution insofar as our motion for reconsideration and the bail question is concerned, we move that that would be expunged from the record because essentially the prosecution filed it belatedly. But as to our motion for reconsideration on the conviction itself, we've just raised additional points to reiterate our main prayers and the motion for reconsideration, and to show and hopefully to convince the judge to overturn her decision on the conviction charges. So we would really like to emphasize, because amidst the conviction in convicting Frenchie and Mariel, there is this already 3 decisions by 3 different courts which effectively ruled that Frenchie is not, one, an NPA member, a New People's Army member. She's not a terrorist. And 2, that she is not engaged in financing terrorism. One, again, is the Lawang resolution and the attempted murder and murder charges against Frenchie and Mariel, where the Lawang Regional Trial Court effectively said that, the person that you are claiming to be Frenchie is not Frenchie, based on the complaint that you filed before this court, based on your own witnesses that you had presented before the prosecution. Secondly, the ruling of the Court of Appeals in the civil forfeiture case had also made mention, or had a ruling or a finding stating that Frenchie and Mariel are human rights defenders. Frenchie is a journalist, Mariel is a lay worker. They are both humanitarian worker, co-conveners of Stand with Samar and Leyte, and effectively saying that, the testimonies of these so-called rebel returnees or military assets are not sufficient to say that a person is engaged in a particular criminal act. So between these and also curiously though, the third decision is the decision of the Tacloban court itself. The Tacloban Regional Trial Court itself, in dismissing or acquitting Frenchie and Mariel in the case of illegal possession of firearms and explosive, categorically said that Frenchie and Mariel were not engaged in any anti-money laundering crimes. They were not engaged in any illegal financial activities at the time of the when the search warrant was applied for and when the search warrant was actually executed. And when you say illegal financial activities, of course, that should embrace financing terrorism. So with these 3 rulings of 3 separate branches, 2 from regional trial courts, from lower courts, and 1 from the Court of Appeals, it really is jarring to see and to read the judgment of conviction against Frenchie and Mariel. And we are the National Union of People's Lawyers, as a lawyers group who had been handling cases of illegal possession of firearms and explosives against activists prior to the enactment of the ATA and prior to the rise of all of these cases of financing terrorism. we are actually very concerned because these are the patterns that we've seen with the filing of these charges, and these are the bad precedents that this conviction is setting. One is that we are observing the weaponization of counterterrorism laws to criminalize lawful civilian work. In particular, NUPL had conducted a study in 2024 and interviewed 90 CSOs, or civil societies organization, NPOs, nonprofit organization, and found over 30% of those interviewed organizations are facing financing terrorism related cases, either criminal prosecution or civil, or on the civil aspect. And we see that with Frenchie and Mariel, with the conviction of a lay worker, with the conviction of a community journalist, it really sends a chilling effect on all those similarly situated individuals. And we also see the continued prosecution of cases based on patently unconstitutional provision. We have been questioning and we have been raising the constitutionality issue in the case of Frenchie and Mariel, the constitutionality of the provision of the FPSA or RA 10168, where the where the designation of, say, the US, the European Union is automatically applied here in the Philippines without other prior determination of the basis of that designation by other or by foreign jurisdiction. And we see that that is unconstitutional, that is in violation of due process. And thirdly, we see that there is really a reliance on testimonies of military assets, and these testimonies of military assets are uncorroborated. They cannot be corroborated at all by any independent evidence, whether that be documentary, whether that be object evidence. We see that not only in Frenchie's case, but in the case of other NGOs that we are handling the cases for either civil forfeiture and or financing terrorism. The allegations are merely on the words of these so-called rebel returnees or the military assets. And sadly, with Frenchie's case, of course, it's really the filing of multiple or successive criminal charges or other charges using state resources for the purpose of ensuring prolonged detention. So if you notice with Frenchie, she was initially charged with illegal possession of firearms and explosive. 1 year thereafter, she was then charged with financing terrorism. And just when the both cases were about to be promulgated or to be submitted for resolution, then we find out that there was another case of attempted murder and murder charges against her. And notably, murder is also, again, a non-bailable offense in the Philippines. So this filing of non-bailable offenses in the Philippines against activists, against human rights defenders is really a way to ensure that they are detained, that they are removed from the communities that they are working with, and effectively prevent them from continuing their work. So at this time, what we're looking at is for the case of Frenchie, because now she only is now facing the judgment for the financing terrorism. The civil forfeiture case is now appealed before the Court of Appeals. We're only waiting for the resolution again on the motion for reconsideration on the favorable ruling that we've received. As to the financing terrorism case, though, our motion for reconsideration on the conviction as well as the denial for bail had already been submitted for resolution. We're only awaiting for the resolution of the judge, and we're thinking that we might know within the next 2 weeks whether the court would rule to reverse her two decisions against Frenchie. So before, I guess, I end my presentation, I had the opportunity to speak with Frenchie after her conviction, right after her conviction. And I think on three separate occasions thereafter, when we visited her in Tacloban City. She appears to be still in, of course, in high hopes of that, eventually, if not now, she's confident that hopefully she's hopeful that her conviction would be reversed, fully knowing that she had not done anything illegal. She had not done whatever the prosecution or whatever the state is saying that she had done. So this is her message. Let me just translate that. This was their message right after the conviction. They're saying that they are really frustrated with what has been done against them, and they know for a fact that their lawyers and their supporters had done everything in within their powers. When they went back to the jail after the conviction, the other persons deprived of liberties, we call them the other jailed persons, had already prepared banners, thanking them, fully expecting that they would be released soon. And these other PDLs were in fact crying, and that it was Frenchie and Mariel who had to console them that, the fight has not ended. We are not giving up. We will continue to fight this conviction. So now they're saying that we again they are thanking all of their supporters, and they are praying that, despite the conviction, the support would still continue, because of that particular ruling of the Regional Trial Court in Tacloban. All the more do they need your support. So that would be all for me.
Wow, thank you very much, Julianne. And, thank you, first of all, for all that you're doing for Frenchie and others. And also, it's good to hear that she still has high hopes and is still, not giving up. That's wonderful to know. Let me ask you just a couple of questions before we move on to our last speaker. And it's about these confusing cases. The court acquitted Frenchie on illegal possession of firearms, as you narrated, yet convicted her on terrorism financing, which is a more serious charge. So, how do you reconcile that legal logic, and what does it reveal about how these laws are being interpreted?
Think that's our main point, even in our motion for reconsideration. We cannot reconcile these findings of the court. The court had already, and even the findings of other courts between the personality of Frenchie and Mariel. There are already decisions by other courts specifically stating that they are not engaged in financing terrorism. And it is important to highlight that in the case that is pending before the Court of Appeals, the civil forfeiture case, it pertains to the exact same incident that is subject of the terror financing case. The sorry.
Have we just
They
lost
are
you?
Yes, they are it includes, or it is referring to the same incident in March 29, 2019. So if the Court of Appeals had already declared that that did not happen, the testimonies of the same rebel returnees as presented in the civil forfeiture case is not enough to say that Frenchie and Mariel is engaged in financing terrorism, then that should have been the same finding as well in the criminal charges. However, that is not the case in this, that's not what happened in this particular case. But that is one of the arguments that we are raising, that we have raised in the motion for reconsideration. That essentially, these findings of other courts and even the court of Tacloban itself in the illegal possession of firearms and explosives are inconsistent. They cannot be reconciled, in fact. Hence, of course, they should be acquitted.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we have, I can see a question in the chat room from Noni Walsh in Australia. She's asking if you can clarify the money in the dormitory that was it part of the money that was illegally seized? Was it part of some humanitarian aid work?
Yes, it is part of the humanitarian aid work. If I may just brief, I've removed it from my slides earlier because I was thinking it was covered by other speakers. But then nonetheless, I would just like to briefly show the Stand with Samar Leyte. In this particular, this is the logo of Stand with Samar and Leyte. They are the co-conveners of this humanitarian efforts. And this humanitarian efforts, both Frenchie and Mariel not only were engaged not only in the not only in relief operation, they were in fact engaged in even policy advocacy of policy changes. They came here in Manila, talked to a lot of congressmen in order, appealed for the repeal of certain laws which are against the interest of the peasant or the people in Eastern Visayas. And they did a lot of relief operations in 2019 because if you remember, Eastern Visayas is on the at the edge of the Pacific Ocean. And year in and year out, it has always been the case where typhoons occur. So especially at the end of the year. So Frenchie and Mariel, not only again were they community journalist, a community journalist and lay worker, they were actively engaged in this humanitarian effort. So that 557,000 were money or funds of the Stand with Samar and Leyte. And in the course of the presentation of the defense, we were able to present the other members of Stand with Samar and Leyte, and even I think one donor to show one of the sources of the funds to show that these are funds from legitimate work for humanitarian work.
Mm-hmm. And it's been argued that this case is politically motivated. So, what concrete evidence or lack thereof supports the claim that these charges are a form of judicial harassment rather than a legitimate prosecution?
I think we have to go back with the very fact that, for one, prior to the arrest of Frenchie and Mariel, she was already under attack precisely because of her work as a community journalist. She was already tailed. She had received a funeral flowers with her photos, with her photo with along with her photograph. So apart from that, financing the charges in itself, the nature of the charges of financing terrorism itself, the manner by which these charges were brought to court 1 year after she was already charged of illegal possession of firearms and explosives. And even if you go back to the records of the application for the search warrant of Frenchie and Mariel, there are no allegations that she is engaged in financing terrorism. So only after they found that particular money, they had to justify seizing that money and show that they were, engaged in some financial activity. And in the terms of the other lawyers of Frenchie, again, for the financing terrorism, they always say it was an afterthought for the
Mhm.
police officers to charge them with financing terrorism. And you also look at the witnesses or the evidences presented before the court in charging them with financing terrorism. All the affidavits charging them that they've went to the mountains of Katbalogan, Samar, and made these distribution of money and logistical supplies, they were done only after they have already been arrested, only after the money was already seized. So effectively, it is It is really politically motivated. One, I guess, from what we've seen in court to justify the seizure of the money. But if you look at the trends in filing of this type of cases in the broader aspect in the Philippines, we see how other NGO workers, indigenous people's rights advocates, another journalist, I guess, in northern Luzon is also charged of financing terrorism based solely on the testimonies of these military assets. They're not able to produce any documentary. It's because precisely we're arguing it's because testimonial evidence, as recognized by our own Supreme Court, is easy to fabricate.
Mhm. And the
And
last question.
yes, go ahead.
And the last question, what steps, or we can say, what are your next legal steps, and what kind of national or international intervention could create, real pressure for either a review or a pardon, or even, fingers crossed, executive clemency, in your view?
Right now, in terms of legal, for the lawyers, we are ready to exhaust all remedies available under the law, including, of course, if the motion for reconsideration is denied, we are ready to appeal the same decision before the Court of Appeals. In so far as international support is concerned, we see how that is effective essentially to ensure that justice would be done. If you are familiar with the case of Maria Ressa, recently the Office of the Solicitor General, in fact, took a different position from her predecessors and argued that Maria Ressa should be her conviction should be reversed. She argued for a different position than the state itself and prayed before the Supreme Court that the case against Maria Ressa would be dismissed. So we're saying that the state, whether that be through the prosecution, whether that be through the Office of the Solicitor General, can do that. They have that particular option that even despite this conviction of the judge and despite there being a pending appeal, they can take a totally different position from the particular conviction. And that is something that we're hoping that if they are able to actually read the records of this particular case, they'd be able to convince themselves that, Frenchie and Mariel are not engaged in financing terrorism. They are human rights workers, both lay worker and a community journalist.
Mhm. That was Julianne Agpalo, Frenchie, courageous lawyer. Thank you very much for joining us today. Now, before we move on to solidarity messages from the global IAWRT community, we will now hear from our final speaker, Bei Lee Yin. And now, Lee is the Asia Pacific Director at the Committee to Protect Journalists, or CPJ. She reported from across Asia for over 2 decades for global news outlets such as Agence France Presse, AFP, and the Thomson Reuters Foundation, with a focus on human rights and social justice. And that was before joining the CPJ in 2022. Thank you for being with us, Lee, and it's over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Violet, and thank you, IAWRT, for organizing this event. I will try to be brief because the speakers before me has covered a lot of grounds, so I'll try not to be repetitive and save some time for any questions from our participants here. I think I'd like to focus on the case of Frenchie and the impact on press freedom. I think because Frenchie Mae Cumpio's case is really emblematic of the weaponizing of the law to silence critical and independent journalism, but also the broader human rights work. The ramifications on press freedom goes not only in the Philippines, but it goes beyond the border. Of course, Frenchie is a beacon of journalism in a country that, in the Philippines, that has long been one of the most dangerous country to be a journalist. Her case is consistent with the pattern that we are seeing across the world. She was harassed, as Attorney Julianne mentioned before, surveilled and ragtagged prior to her arrest, after she reported critically on issues about her community and also about human rights abuses. And this pattern is consistent with the targeting of human rights defender and journalists during the administrations of the former Philippine leader, Rodrigo Duterte. Her convictions in January, I was on the ground, of course, to monitor her verdict in court in Tacloban, and that convictions is extremely alarming because she's the first journalist convicted on financing terrorism charges in the Philippines, and also the country longest imprisoned journalist in recent years. She is the only journalist who remains imprisoned in the Philippines at the moment. And even more concerning is that, as attorney mentioned before, that her conviction relies solely on the testimony from witnesses whose credibility is highly questionable. And this conviction really sets a very dangerous precedent because it puts the Philippines, which is a country that is a vibrant democracy, in the same league as countries like Myanmar and Russia. Even, more stark, in the year that the Philippines chairs the regional bloc of ASEAN, the Associations of South Asian Nations. And attorney just now has covered quite a lot of grounds on the legal aspect, which shared by us at CPJ, that her case raised serious concerns about issues like fabrications of evidence, there was judicial harassment, the very long, unjustifiable pretrial detentions of nearly 6 years before her convictions. And of course, we have to point out that other cases that was brought against Frenchie have already fallen apart. The court quashed her murder charges. Well, another court also found that there was no evidence that she was a terrorist. So, again, there is very strong ground for us to advocate for her release, and we continue to call for that. And I think, after 6 years of imprisonment, prolonged detentions and imprisonment, we must not lose hope. And I would like to point out, of course, I met with Frenchie 2 months ago in Tacloban. We've been petitioning for that rights to visit her in prison. It finally came true on the eve of her convictions. But we must not lose hope, because international pressure works, and through, as we see, through the acquittal of her other charge on illegal possessions of firearms. I'm very thankful, of course, to the work of organizations like IAWRT and the NUPL, the NUJP, and Media, who have been campaigned for Frenchie's freedom right from the start. And on CPJ part, we have been advocating as well for her release for years, right from the start, and raised the alarm, the global alarm on her detentions. Our advocacy, of course, intensified since a CPJ mission to Tacloban 3 years ago. And since then, the international pressure and attention on her case has been growing on her prolonged imprisonment. After our missions in 2023, the following year, we saw that UN Special Rapporteur Irene Khan visited Frenchie in prison. Irene was the first international visitor who was allowed to visit her. And a year ago, we convened the Free Frenchie Mae Cumpio International Coalitions. I'm very thankful to our partners in the coalitions, Media, NUJP, Reporters Without Borders, and Free Press Unlimited. We have advocated for Frenchie collectively for her freedom, and I'm very grateful for their support. And over the last year, we have seen her case has been raised at many international platforms, including Frenchie's case has been listed as one of the world 10 most urgent cases on World Press Freedom Day last year. The case was brought up at the Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, by the Special Rapporteur Irene Khan, who call her prolonged detention a travesty of justice. We saw that the embassies in the Media Freedom Coalition has come together very strongly to raise their concerns about Frenchie's prolonged imprisonment. They monitor her trial. They visited her in prisons, including 2 ambassadors who have visited Frenchie in prisons in Tacloban. This is pretty unprecedented in the context of the Philippines. We saw across the world more than 250 prominent journalists from Asia, from Africa, from Europe, and the United States, wrote together to President Marcos Jr. asking for Frenchie to be released. And of course, we also nominated quite recently with our partners at RSF and FPU, we nominated Frenchie for the UNESCO Prize, Cano Prize, that will be announced this year on World Press Freedom Day in recognition of her very brave and courageous journalism that, she continues to hope to be able to return to her work once she's free from that prison. And again, this month, 5 UN special rapporteurs issued a joint statement calling for her, provisional release pending bail, describing that her conviction is deeply troubling. I think all this is to show that, all this advocacy is to show that, we are sending a very clear message to President Marcos that we will not rest until Frenchie walks out from the prison in Tacloban, and the world is watching, and he must end this injustice right now.
Thank you very much, Lee, for this presentation. Now, I also have a couple of questions for you before we move to taking questions from the audience. I just can't see the questions right now, but we'll come back to you. So the first one is, why is the CPJ particularly concerned about Frenchie's prolonged detention?
Yeah, we are very concerned because, as you heard from the other speaker before, that how her case and the charges are trumped up to silence her community journalism and her critical journalism. And also, this is part of a global trend that we are seeing across the world. Governments are weaponizing the law against journalists. As you heard, that there are so many flaws in the prosecutions. She was accused of illegal possessions of firearms and financing terrorism. But again, we are not seeing, and she was accused of transporting things like trousers to the rebels in the mountains in the Philippines, but there were any sort of tangible record that was tendered in court. And this case again relies solely on the testimony from the prosecution witnesses, using witnesses from the military as such, from AFP, which is the Armed Forces of the Philippines. And the testimony that are almost template style as described by the lawyers. So we are very concerned because it's part of that trend that speaks to the trend of growing criminalizations against journalists and journalism.
Mm-hmm. And I'm currently in South Africa I was attending a media roundtable for journalists in 18 countries in Africa, countries that are, going through conflict situations. And it was quite alarming to see the, appalling or the terrible crisis that we have as journalists even in Africa, especially with what's also happening in the world right now. What are, in your view, well, I can't really say the biggest challenges, but I can say, what are the biggest challenges facing journalists today, especially amid this overlapping global crisis? We see what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. We see what's happening in the Middle East. We see what's happening in America. And then obviously, as I mentioned just now, even the situation in Africa, where journalists are also under attack and the world is just watching. So from your, as a pressure group, international pressure group, what are you seeing from your side?
Indeed, today is the most dangerous time to be a journalist. but it is also the deadliest time to be a journalist. As you alluded to, that we are seeing rising conflicts across the world. We are seeing how, as I mentioned just now, the growing criminalizations against journalists across the world. And there's also impunity. There's no accountability or justice when it comes to this kind of crime against journalists. In terms of the growing criminalizations of journalists, last year we saw 330 journalists imprisoned. For context, CPJ put out a report annually looking at the state of imprisoned journalists around the world. And last year, there were 330 journalists imprisoned. It was the 5th year in a row that we are seeing more than 300 journalists across the world are imprisoned because of their journalism. That speaks to the kind of level of challenge that journalists are facing today simply for reporting the facts and reporting what happened to their community. And in Asia, the situation is even more alarming and dangerous because Asia for many years remains the region with the highest number of imprisoned journalists, accounting for more than a third of that global figure. So I think, again, governments around the world are taking a page out of their own playbook that is regardless in authoritarian regimes or democracy like the Philippines. And we must, as journalists, we must come together and use our voices and our solidarity to speak up for those who are imprisoned or killed because of their work. Silence is not an option in this case.
Definitely, silence is not an option. And that's my last question about, are there any upcoming international advocacy steps or campaigns planned for Frenchie and others? And also, how can media organizations like ours, IAWRT, support these initiatives?
Well, thank you so much first for of course, organizing this event. I think event like this really ensure that journalists like Frenchie is not forgotten, sitting in a prison, not in the capital, but outside, in the province, in the Eastern Philippines, is not forgotten. We must ensure there is sustained advocacy and attentions on their cases, speak their names, make sure their names are staying in the headlines. There's a lot of strength in our solidarity. And of course, on our part, we will continue our advocacy with our Free Frenchie Mae Cumpio coalitions and all the other international and local partners. We continue to monitor her trial. For example, on Monday, we monitor her trial. We continue watching, sending the message to the Philippine authorities, and a lot of our international stakeholders and partners are also following the case closely. But I think, again, there will be sustained advocacy on her case. We will make sure Frenchie is not forgotten and all the other journalists who are in prison are not forgotten. But in Frenchie's case, very clear, again, I want, that the onus is really on President Marcos right now to show whether he is any different than his predecessor, President Duterte, or whether he can carry out real reforms or he's just paying lip service.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you very much, Lee, for the vital work you do at the CPJ, engaging with high-level government officials, policymakers, and the international organizations to defend press freedom, and also demanding justice for journalists under threat. Your voice and CPJ's advocacy are essential in this fight. So thank you very much for that. Now, before we move to our last segment, I just wanted to check if there are any questions from the floor before we move on to solidarity messages from our global IAWRT community. Are there any questions or comments for our speakers? I can't actually see any right now. We can always come back. Okay, I think we can come back. So we are moving on. We now turn to our solidarity messages segment from the global IAWRT community. Our first, from both our global IAWRT community and also from some of our partners in the international organizations. Our first message comes from Ms. Renuka Sandhwa, who is the second secretary in the political department at the British Embassy in Manila.
Good afternoon. I am Renuka Sandhwa from the British Embassy in Manila. Thank you for inviting me to deliver a message for this event. As you know, the Media Freedom Coalition has been closely monitoring the case of Frenchie Mae Cumpio and Marielle Domakil. The UK visited them in Tacloban City last August and observed the case hearings along with other members of the Media Freedom Coalition. We will continue to monitor progress on their case closely. As co-chair of the Media Freedom Coalition, we remain fully committed to safeguarding press freedom and protecting the rights of journalists everywhere. Journalists must be able to carry out their vital work without fear of intimidation or harassment or retribution, whether at home or abroad. We will continue to use our collective voice to highlight media freedom concerns on the international stage, and we will work closely with our partners to address the challenges facing independent media. Together, we will shine a spotlight on threats to press freedom in the Philippines, in the UK, and around the world, ensuring that this fundamental right is upheld and strengthened globally. Thank you, and I wish you all the best for the event.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. That was Ms. Renuka Sandhwa, who is the second secretary from the British Embassy in Manila. Now we go to our IAWRT global community, and we start with Nupo Basu. I believe Nupo is with us today. She's from IAWRT India, and of course she's speaking from India. Nupo?
Hello everyone. I bring solidarity messages from our entire chapter for Frenchie Mae Cumpio. It was absolutely alarming to be reminded of the circumstances under which Frenchie is still being held. Just wanted to list three of them, which is sort of sending that chilling effect in me even now as I digest what Juliana said. One is the afterthought charges, one is the inconsistent charges, and the third is the mistaken identity of Frenchie Mae under which she could have been arrested. These are just amazing circumstances, but this is not the first time that we are hearing it. And as the CPG representative reminded us, there are 300 journalists, over 300 journalists, for the fifth year in the world who are in prison. Talking about my own country, I believe it's about 7 now who are still in prison. And, one who was assassinated brutally in 2017, a woman journalist. Women journalists are a soft target. We at IAWRT have made a film on it called Velvet Revolution. We have also been talking about it incessantly for the last at least a decade, if not more, saying that governments, both both state and non-state actors are just, using them as soft targets to arrest, to file FIRs, and in some very, very brutal cases, even end their lives. So it's a really, really a very, very grim situation all over. Women are not being spared as they were maybe earlier. From all these consequences. We also know of countries like Iran. I don't want to list the countries. We are all aware of what's going on in the world. We are also aware of what's going on in the so-called largest democracy like USA, what journalists are going through in Pentagon. Last week, the message was that they've all protested and they've returned their press cards. So I just, all the speakers have very, very powerfully delineated Frenchie Mae Cumpio's case. We're all assembled here at different timings from different parts of the world to show her solidarity and to show solidarity to all journalists across the world who are being held under these horrible circumstances. Two things I just want to end with. One is what's left me really moved is that photograph of Frenchie's mother with her two brothers after the verdict, which Dabet showed us. And also, my God, I actually, having covered this for, as I said, over a decade, the attacks on women journalists, I had never heard of a funeral bouquet. And that is just like hearing that today of how a funeral bouquet was sent to Frenchie Mae. I'm just speechless. Thank you.
Thank you very Thanks, Nupo, for those insights. And it is shocking that in this day and age, we still remain soft targets, as you say. We welcome next Noni Walsh in Australia. Noni, can you unmute? Is Noni still with us? Oh, no mic. Okay, so did I get that right? I'm just checking. I think Noni's saying she hasn't got a microphone right now. Hopefully we can get her later. Let's see if we can go to Norway, where we will hear from Bibiana in a pre-recorded message. Jola, can you help us with that?
Dear all, and especially dear Frenchie Mae, I still remember very well when we met in Tacloban almost 10 years ago. You were this young, energetic, smiling, and intelligent radio journalist, and you made an impression. The fact that you have now spent the best years of your life in prison is, I cannot find the word strong enough. It's bizarre, it's horrific, and it's truly unjust. That's only the beginning. Your conviction has been named bogus and a travesty. And I pray that the judge will now overturn it. It's not a second too soon. I also would like to commend everyone who's been and is working hard to secure your freedom. First and foremost, IAWRT Philippines, but also Reporters Without Borders and the Committee to Protect Journalists. For journalism is under pressure, not only in the Philippines, but in many parts of the world. And all of us must vigilantly defend the right to free speech and to be able to do our job as critical journalists without fear. As many before me have said, this may be the most serious fight of our lifetime. Frenchie, you have already become a strong symbol of that fight. And when you get out, we, your colleagues and companions all over the world, will make sure that your story is being told everywhere. Until then, hang in there, Frenchie.
That was a former IAWRT board member, IAWRT International board member, Bibiana Pien in Norway. Still in Norway, I think we also have a solidarity message from Una Solberg.
Hi from Chile, Sweden. Sorry I cannot be with you. My name is Una Solberg, an old-time member. I'm in Amsterdam for meetings in a women's archive, Atria, to find a way of taking care of our historical material or memory as an organization. I have followed the fate of Frenchie Mae Cumpio, I hope I pronounce it right, for all these years, and I want again to show my solidarity. She was so young when she was arrested. She has spent many years behind bars, her best years maybe. She was a local journalist, struggling with all the dilemmas of a local journalist anywhere. I know, because I've been one myself. She became famous worldwide for her courage, mentioned by Maria Ressa in her Nobel speech, her case taken up by many international organizations, among them International Press Institute. She was one of 50 women journalists imprisoned worldwide last year, and this is seen as an increasing trend. Women journalists are bearing the burden of a global crackdown on press freedom. A UNESCO report about this has just been released here in Sweden. Journalism is not a crime, and journalists are not criminals. Frenchie Mae Cumpio should be free to do her job, and we are with her.
Thank you, Una. And next, I think let's try someone from the gallery. Is Eunice from Uganda in? Eunice Kasiri? If you are, can you unmute, please, Eunice? While we're waiting for Eunice, I see a statement from, it says, hi, it's Garrett here from Baturu in Bangkok, Thailand. As Baturu is now working to collaborate with artists to illustrate Frenchie's story to a graphic novel for reaching more public and international on her fighting journey, I would like to ask if it's possible if we can have the slides presented today for more on her background and activities. Also, Baturu is also planning to publish her story in the future on our Facebook page, Baturu Women's Film Festival as well. If you all have any suggestions on organizing or collaborating or comic artists in the Philippines, please feel free to let me know and the email address is there, Jola and IAWRT Philippines. Can you also jot that down and get in touch with Baturu? Thank you very much for the solidarity. Now, do we have Eunice on the line? Okay, while we're waiting for, is Eunice here?
No, Bijit. Bijit is here.
Okay. Oh, great. Now we go to one of our veteran members, Brigitte Jalov in Denmark. Can you unmute, please, Brigitte?
I just did.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Violet. And hello to everyone. We are today meeting up under the banner of justice at a moment when the global community, through the recent conclusion of the Commission on the Status of Women 70, has reaffirmed that access to justice is not abstract. It's about real women, real lives, and real consequences. And that brings us directly to the case of Frenchie Mae Cumpio. Her detention on allegations of terrorism financing is not an isolated case. It reflects a deeply troubling global pattern, the criminalization of journalism, and in particular, the silencing of women journalists who dare to report uncomfortable truth. Let's be clear, when journalists are labeled criminals for doing their work, justice systems are not protecting society and democracy. They're being used to undermine it. As women in the media, we know that telling the truth is not always safe, but it's always necessary. Whether reporting on conflict, on corruption, or inequality, women journalists often face the double burden of repression and gender-based threats, both online and offline. That's why Frenchie Mae's case matters far beyond the Philippines. It's about the shrinking space for independent media everywhere. And it's about whether governments will uphold their commitments, not only in words, but in action. The Commission on the Status of Women reminds us that access to justice depends on political will. So today we must ask, where is that will when journalists are detained for reporting? Solidarity must go beyond statements. We must continue to speak out, as we do today, to document these cases, to support those at risk, and to insist that journalism is not a crime. Because when women journalists are silenced, entire communities are left unheard. And when truth is suppressed, justice itself is diminished. So let's stand firmly with you, Frenchie Mae Cumpio, and with all women journalists who continue against all odds to tell the truth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bree. And indeed, journalism is not a crime. Now we take a short break and see some of some slides that Jola has put together about Frenchie and narrated by Janess. It's over to you, Jola and Janess.
Hi everyone, we're back. Okay, so these are just some of the photos where detailing the involvement and the life of Frenchie Mae Cumpio. So these photos were taken in 2016. As you can see, she's very, very young here. Here she is attending a training on community radio. So these are just some of the photos. And if you can see, some of the participants as well are also fellow survivors of the typhoon. Again, more photos of the training. You can see her wearing light blue, and Jola is there as well. If you can see her wearing white, very young too. So if you can, and I remember earlier, it was mentioned just how bright and just how her smile and how bright her smile is. So this is some of the photos. This one is 2 years later. She is now doing some a narrow cast. This is a service that she provides to communities of farming communities under attack. This one was being held in Katarman, also again in partnership with IAWRT. IAWRT International Board. We cannot find some of her photos when she attended the biennial, but we were able to get her photos from our 2019 General Assembly. This was also the time when the international office in Manila was opened. This was, and then a few months later, the pandemic came in. And also a few months later, she was arrested. If I remember correctly, this was also the time where she was sharing some of the attacks, the surveillance, and also the attacks against her and her team. And as I've said, a few months later, she was arrested. So you can see her circled. That's her sitting down in front of the of women journalists. Again, she's there, wearing blue. Ayan, she's so young and still young now. She was so young and still young now, and we hope to be able to see her in the field again, doing what she loves the most, which is to cover the plight of marginalized communities, the plight and aspirations of marginalized communities. I turn over the floor back to you, Violet.
Thank you very much, Janess. Can you hear me? I think I've just lost connection. Can you hear me? Can someone just send a love or a like so that I know everyone is still alive? Okay. All right. Okay, so our next solidarity message is coming from Nepal. I think we have Icha on the line.
Namaste, warm greetings to everyone. As a president of International Association of Women in Radio and Television Nepal, I express deep concern over the case of Filipino journalist Frenchie Mae Cumpio and human rights defender Mariel Demecuelco. Their conviction after nearly 6 years of detention, along with the denial of bail, raises serious questions about fairness and justice. Such action threatens press freedom and the right of free expression. We stand in solidarity with the Office of UN and the international community in calling for their immediate release and just review of their case. IAWRT Nepal always stand for press freedom.
Thank you. And that was our chapter head, Nepal chapter head, Icha. And now, before we finalize this segment, I think we have an email that has been sent by our Kurdistan Iraq chapter head. Let me just look for it. I have to go. I have to turn off the video for a second, but you will hear me so that I can just read her statement. Okay, this is a statement emailed by Awaz just now. She says, "Good day to everyone. My name is Awaz Salim, and I am speaking to you today as a journalist, a woman, and the chair of the Iraq Kurdistan branch of the International Association of Women in Radio and Television. In my region, we understand all too well the price of speaking truth to power. We know the weight of the threats, the surveillance, and the legal harassment that aim to silence women who refuse to stay quiet. Today, I stand in solidarity with our colleague, Frenchie Mae Cumpio. Frenchie's story is not just a Philippine story. It is a global warning. At only 27, she has spent over 6 years behind bars. Her recent conviction of 12 to 18 years for terrorism financing, despite being acquitted of weapons charges, is a clear example of lawfare. That's the use of the legal system as a weapon to crush independent journalism. As women in media, we are often the first targets of red tagging and character assassination. Excuse me. By labeling Frenchie a terrorist financier, the authorities are trying to delegitimize her vital work covering military abuses and community struggles in the Eastern Visayas. When a community journalist like Frenchie is silenced, an entire region loses its voice. When a young woman is imprisoned for her reporting, it sends a chilling message to every girl who dreams of becoming a truth teller. As the chair of IAWRT in Kurdistan, I join the international call for justice. We demand that the court on March 23rd reconsider this unjust conviction. Frenchie Mae is not a criminal. She is a brave journalist who has been nominated for the UNESCO World Press Freedom Prize for a reason. Her place is in the newsroom and not a prison cell. To Frenchie, we hear you, we see you, and we will not stop advocating for your freedom until you come home. That was a solidarity message from our own IAWRT member in Iraq, Kurdistan, and that was Awaz. Now, before we close this segment, we would like to invite our audience again to open their videos and or if there's anyone first before we take a group picture. Is there anyone else before we go who wants to say something? Okay, there is Ellie who says, hi, it's Ellie here. Just aligning with what Janess mentioned earlier, I am volunteering my capacities in any efforts to build capacity and support for community journalists like Frenchie Mae. My background is in incident response coordination and management, end user and organizational security, and secure infrastructure. Please extend my solidarity with Frenchie and Mariel. Thank you very much, Ellie. And then Krishma, would you like to say something?
Very same.
Yes,
Yes, go ahead,
Violet.
Krishma.
Yeah, thank you so much, and hi everybody. I just wanted to briefly read my message that I sent in the text box. I stand in solidarity with Frenchie Mae Cumpio on behalf of the Afghanistan chapter and my colleagues. Her case is not only about one journalist; it reflects a, a broader concern about the ability of journalists everywhere to report freely and without fear. We believe in the importance of due process, transparency, and respect for the fundamental principle of journalism. We sincerely hope that this collective solidarity will contribute to a fair and just resolution of her case. Thank you, Violet, for giving me the chance.
Thank you very much, Krishma. And from the Cameroon, we have the IAWRT Cameroon President, Welisani, on the line. Welisani, can you turn your video on and your mic, please?
Yeah, greetings, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Hello, Violet. Good to see you. I just wanted to reaffirm our support for Frenchie from Cameroon. We are with you and with the entire team. I just feel like if it was me, I would like to see this kind of solidarity. So I really appreciate it. And we just want the entire team to know that Cameroon will do anything that is necessary to support and to ensure that she regains her freedom. Please let us know if there's something that we can do. And thanks for all that have been done so far by IAWRT and the entire community to secure her release and also make sure that she's fine where she is right now. Thank you so much, Violet.
Thank you very much, Welisani. And also thank you to everyone for your powerful messages of unity and resistance. Your voices echo far beyond this online room. And before we go, I would like all of us to turn on our videos. I think Jola would like to take pictures. Can we all turn our videos on? And Jola, can you direct us so that we know what we need to be doing?
Yeah. We will just wait for the others.
Okay. While we're doing that, I just want to actually say that everyone, of course, as we said earlier on, we are always facing challenges all over the world right now. So we should take care, we should stay strong, and also keep Frenchie Mae and others and every journalist behind bars, for doing their jobs in our thoughts, our actions, our prayers. The fight continues, as Nupo said, and Bridget also said that until Frenchie is free. And bye for now. We will take these last few seconds to take, the group pictures. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm Violet Gonda.
Okay, just a count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Another one. Then let's go to another page. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Bye.
Bye-bye.